Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Draft, where I talk with journalists and authors from around the country about the important work that they're doing. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square. Last year, President Trump told Republicans in Texas to gerrymander the state to give the party 5 more congressional seats. California voters responded by passing their own redistricting referendum in the solid blue state. Next week, voters head to the polls for a high-stakes special election that could reshape Virginia politics. Virginians will vote on a ballot measure that will temporarily bypass the bipartisan Redistricting Commission, which would hand the power back to the General Assembly to redraw congressional lines. Helping us break all of this down is Michael O'Connor, the political correspondent for the Dogwood, which is Courier Newsroom's Virginia outlet. Welcome back to the show, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, I know we talked last year about Virginia politics before you had a really consequential election. Of course, Virginia and New Jersey are unusual because you have your statewide elections in odd number years. And of course, since we've talked, Democrats won sweeping victories and now have a governing trifecta. Can you talk to us just a little bit about what happened and what's changed in the state?
Yeah. So Abigail Spanberger won in a landslide. She won, I think, more votes than any modern day Virginia governor has ever won. The Democrats took over. They expanded their margin in the state legislature, and it was a very historic victory. It was a very, she ran against a kind of a weaker candidate on the Republican side, and things were riding really high. And then, this redistricting campaign, has kicked off shortly after she was sort of inaugurated in January. Well, I should kind of rewind that a little bit. So after she's elected and the legislative session begins, the Democrats have to hustle to pass resolutions to hold this referendum that we're less than a week away from now. And so that's kind of how we got there. There's a little bit of, Republicans sued to stop it, stop the referendum from even happening. That didn't work. And so now the referendum's moving forward, next week. The honeymoon period for Spanberger was it was tamped down by this because, she's like other Democrats, like Barack Obama, has previously said she's opposed to gerrymandering. And so Republicans are really using that kind of against her in this campaign. And just one quick other thought on that is just, the campaign, the debate over this referendum is kind of, the messaging around it, is Republicans are trying to make it just about, what's happening in Virginia, right? And kind of, make it about fairness and things like that. Mm-hmm. And Democrats are trying to make the case that, this is part of this national fight that, we're in with Trump, and this is your chance to, push back on what's happening with Trump. And so that's kind of just where things stand.
Yeah. So before we dig into the redistricting referendum, just talk to us a little bit about the bigger state of politics in Virginia. Virginia is a purple state that has definitely trended blue in recent years. But prior to Spanberger, you had a Republican governor. For part of Glenn Youngkin's term, he did have, Republicans controlling the legislature as well, the assembly. So talk to us about the bigger dynamics about what's going on in the state and how durable this Democratic coalition, seems to be.
That's a great question. I think, if you were to ask me that the day after Spanberger won, I'd be way more bullish on it. But I think what sort of, this redistricting fight is playing out is showing is that it's not as blue of a state as some people might have you think. I think the redistricting campaign is showing that it's a little tougher of a fight than maybe people expected. And so I think, more broadly speaking, I think it comes down to like where independents stand with a lot of these things too, because that's part of why Spanberger did so well. She did, and other Democrats on her ticket, they did really well with independents. And there was a new poll, polls that have come out, around redistricting, including one today, shows that, the redistricting vote is not as popular with these independents. And so I think when we think about Virginia, it's definitely not like a blue state the way like California is, where Republicans haven't won in who knows how long. Although I could be wrong about that. I'm not like a California politics reporter. But yeah, I think it just goes to show that here in Virginia, you do kind of have to win over independents, I guess. But then I don't know. There's like this. It's tough to say just because of how our politics, like our national politics, is changing. Like people, it's like people are less interested in like left versus right and more as like top versus down, like this element of populism. And I think like we're seeing some of that here. Like one of the big debates that's happening is over how should we tax data centers. And I'll just end on this little point about that. The state Senate proposed a budget to lift a tax exemption for data centers that leaves about $1 billion on the table in tax revenue for the state. And it's dividing Democrats, right? Because while this, more populist figures like State Senator Luis Lucas are saying, hey, data centers can pay their fair share, which is, I think, the sentiment broadly shared by most people. There are Democrats, including Spanberger, who are saying, hey, we promised to have this tax exemption last like a certain amount of years. We should keep that promise because we need to be able to lure other businesses in and attract investment and figure out a different way to kind of go about making data centers pay their fair share. And so that's just an example of how, like, I guess even Democrats are kind of divided on this issue in Virginia. And there isn't like a dominant strain. There isn't like a dominant like populist figure that's kind of tapped into some of that trend that we've seen, like, in New York City or other places.
Yeah. The data center issue is fascinating. And I think you are seeing a divide amongst Democrats in a lot of states. I'm in Michigan and I'm seeing it here as well. So it does seem to be an issue that will be part of a lot of elections this fall. So definitely would love to talk with you as we get closer to the midterm elections about how that and other issues are playing out in Virginia. And I appreciate the perspective on Spanberger because nationally, her star seems ascendant. She gave the response to Trump's State of the Union and got very high marks for that. But the thing that I really love about talking with reporters who cover state politics is, how it's playing back home, which can often be very different than how it's playing nationally and certainly on Twitter, which we all know is not real life. So that's interesting to see how this redistricting measure seems to be playing in the state. And while ultimately Democrats might be victorious, there may be a cost to that. So that's definitely an interesting dynamic. Talk to us about what could happen if this does pass. What is the current map? What does that look like now? And what could a new map look like?
Yeah, so the current map is 6-5, 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans. And the new map has the potential to result in a 10-1 map, 10 Democrats, 1 Republican. And so I think, Republicans would lose up to 4 seats.
Which is very significant.
Yeah, it is, I guess, in a sense, that, but the other thing too is like, it is temporary. The independent redistricting commission would kick back in at the end of the decade. And so that's kind of part of the pitch for Democrats is that, like, hey, look, this might seem, like a sort of extraordinary measure, but we kind of have extraordinary times and this is only kind of temporary. And so It's interesting. There was a poll that came out today from a really great polling company, State Navigate. You probably heard of them, but they asked folks. They like showed the two maps to voters without like identifying what the maps were. Just kind of like, what do you think of these two maps? And they both, to different voters, they both look gerrymandered, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like it was just, and so it's, and as you would expect, like the responses to the polling was just very partisan.
Mm-hmm.
If you were Republican, like you were against this push, and if you were a Democrat, you were very much in favor of it. And ultimately, the poll showed that there's like a 5-point advantage for the yes vote right now,
Okay.
according to this poll, which is a really like a great pollster. They got the 2025 election right, so it's definitely worth looking up. I can send you the link if maybe worth sharing with like your audience. But
That would be great.
yeah.
Yeah, we seem to be in the midst of an arms race when it comes to redistricting. I know I've been covering politics for a couple of decades, and this used to be a process that we would cover every 10 years. Then Texas kind of kicked things off by doing their midterm redistricting, and now we're looking at redistricting fights every 2 or 4 years, which was not the way it used to be. And of course, there used to be the debate where it was just, oh, well, populations have changed and we need to be conscious of that. Now it's pretty explicit. It's, Trump saying, find me 5 Republican seats in Texas, and Gavin Newsom in California, the Democratic governor, saying, fine, we'll cut as many Republican seats as we can to counter that. And now you see Virginia and Maryland and Ohio and Indiana, lots of fights in heavier Democratic or Republican states that are retaliating. Michael, do you see this process ending at any point, or is this just the new normal in politics?
Oof. That's hard to say for me personally. When you were talking about that, though, I was thinking about what happened in Hungary, with Viktor Orban getting overwhelmingly voted out of power, and just kind of thinking of that as maybe a crack in the dam, that this kind of seemingly endless politics of like division. And I think, people are just exhausted, like Jon Stewart had a joke about how like typically the presidency is supposed to age the presidency, not like the people. But we all feel like just so tired,
No
of
kidding.
everything that's happening. And so I will say in Virginia, again, it's temporary, right? We're supposed to revert back to the norm that you described. So that's kind of the hope. And it's also worth noting that in Virginia, Democrats are showing the maps. They publish the maps before voters make this vote. I think in North Carolina, they didn't even, I don't even know if they asked the voters, right? So it's like, I think Democrats in Virginia were very sensitive to the perception that they were not being transparent, even if, Republicans have taken issue with the language of the referendum, which includes the word fairness, right? Which, but to answer your question, do I see this ending? I think you have to. Like, you can't get up in the morning and think this is it. Like you just have to think, well, it's we have to keep fighting somehow and keep participating and reading really good journalism. I mean, that's the key, right?
I know you've done a lot of reporting on this fight, and you have done a great job in outlining who the players are for the referendum, against it. And there's some really big names that are involved, not just in Virginia, but nationally. There's a group that's linked to Peter Thiel, a tech billionaire. I know House Speaker Mike Johnson has been in campaigning. Talk with us a little bit, walk us through who are the big hitters on the pro side and the anti side, and what kind of impact is that having?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because like, I guess the thought process is like, you want to bring in people who are going to get, people excited, big star power. I mean, I think one of the biggest endorsements the Yes side got was this video message from former President Barack Obama, urging people to vote. His, Attorney General Eric Holder visited Virginia. Virginia's been visited by House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who actually attended Spanberger's inauguration back in January, before this kind of really, when this was kind of like bubbling up. And Spanberger, she has been, she put out a video message about it. And so, yeah, and then on the no side, like you mentioned, Eric Cantor, Youngkin, former Republican Governor Youngkin, was stumping for it. Former Attorney General Jason Miyares has been a pretty consistently stumping for the no vote. And as you mentioned, this group that was kind of linked to Peter Thiel has been pouring money into it. So, pretty good. I mean, Trump, actually, I haven't seen much of what Trump has said about it. I mean, he was in Charlottesville the other day, so I have to imagine I didn't see what he said about it, though. Yeah.
Is it a possible technique for Republicans to try and keep Trump out of this because he's such a polarizing figure?
I would think so. I mean, he hasn't been, the messaging around the no campaign has not been talking about Trump, right? Mm-hmm. And the yes campaign has been much more about how this is, when you ask, the first day of early voting, I was in Alexandria, completely by chance, and this black SUV pulled up, and out steps Mark Warner to vote early on the first day of early voting, which is just, I was just really lucky to be there. And I asked him, why'd you vote yes? And he said something that, Democrats have said consistently, is just that everyone wants to know how they can push back against Trump. This is how, right? This is your way. This is your tangible way to show up and feel like you did something. Mm-hmm. So certainly Trump is, they're trying to make this about Trump, and Republicans are just trying to kind of quarantine that and just be nope, this is about Virginia. This is about fairness. This is an unfair power grab from Democrats, but while also supporting gerrymandering that's happening in, Indiana and, mm-hmm. or, North Carolina. So, yeah.
Well, let's talk about former Governor Glenn Youngkin. You have such an unusual term limit system in Virginia where governors are one and done for their terms, which I believe you're the only state in the country that does that. So you've had some prominent governors before, but it's hard for them because they can't prove themselves for at least a couple terms, governors can, even in term limited states like Michigan or California. I know there was a lot of talk about Youngkin's future, especially after Biden won the presidency. And there seemed to be some hope from some people on the Republican side that Trump may not run again, which of course was proven entirely incorrect. But Glenn Youngkin was considered one of those bright lights and hopes for the party for the future. He was younger. He was able to win some suburban voters. He initially seemed to have some popularity, but now he's out of the governor's office. Virginia has 2 Democratic senators, for instance. Where would he go from here for his political future if that's a road he wanted to take?
Yeah, I mean, he told Sean Hannity, I think the other day or week, that he has, quote, more to give. So I think,
more vests to wear, I guess.
Yes, more basketballs to bounce and shoot. But yeah, I think he's certainly, interested in a future political career. I think, Virginia governors, I think, tend to go on to become senators, or they try to at least. So he could be, a senator, or, 2028, he could be positioning himself to try to be president. So we'll just have to see. I do think we'll see him again in some capacity, though.
I know that one of the mailers against the referendum attracted a lot of attention. I think the group was called Democracy and Justice PAC, and there was a former Republican delegate behind it. And it featured some pretty controversial imagery reminiscent of, some civil rights protests and really talking about race issues. Can you walk us through that, and what's been the impact of that kind of negative campaigning?
Yeah, that's been really controversial here. There's been, a half a dozen different kinds of these mailers.
Okay.
Just, uh, you know, trying to say that voting yes for this redistricting is akin to Jim Crow, and
Hmm.
in the way that it would dilute the voices of Black voters. Um, and I think the Virginia NAACP has come out, very forcefully against this kind of language. I mean, the No campaign is using the imagery of Martin Luther King Jr. And I don't think any political campaign should just be willy nilly with his imagery. I think, and so, especially not to suggest that in a kind of a twisted way to suggest that somehow this is going to dilute the power of Black voters. They've done things like with mailers quoting Obama and Spamberger out of context about gerrymandering,
Mm.
and so I think there has been a backlash, certainly amongst civil rights groups and Democratic leaders, saying this is outrageous, and just like, what does that say about you and what you think about the people you're trying to appeal to if you're lying to them? You know,
Hmm.
um, I think there arguably has been. I talked to one voter who she told me when she got a text with Obama's picture from this group and him talking about how gerrymandering's bad, and then she figured out that it was a deception tactic. It made her more motivated to vote yes. And I think that's the risk when you do something like this, is like you're insulting people's intelligence.
Hmm.
And if you have to lie about your theory of the case, then it can't be a very strong theory of the case.
Hmm. And it
Um,
seems like it has gotten some significant media attention, so it's not like it's one of those under the radar tactics either.
Definitely. I don't, I'm not a political strategist, but it'd be one thing if it was just like one mailer and then they stopped, but they've really committed to it. Their
Hmm.
television ads feature this stuff, and it's their mailers and their text messages. So, yeah, and maybe it's a suggestion that they're desperate, because they know that they're at a disadvantage, even if it's more narrow than people might have expected, given the margin of the governor's race. Um, but we'll just have to see what happens on the day of the referendum on Tuesday.
Yeah. Uh, Ultimately, do you have any sense of what voters are going to decide to do on this next Tuesday?
I mean, yeah, the polling definitely shows that the yes vote has an advantage. I don't think it's in the bag. I think that
Mhm.
they need to run through the finish line, but they have the advantage. I think there is. When I talk to voters at the polls, when I've gone out, I talk to a lot, people who are just like, yeah, I'm tired of Trump. Um, and so I think, given his unpopularity, I think, and given the kind of trending blue way that Virginia is, the yes vote is in a position to win. But I don't think anybody's counting their chickens before they hatch.
And if this ultimately does pass, what happens next?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, procedurally, I don't really know like the nitty gritty offhand, but uh, the new map would be in place, and we'd be sprinting towards the midterms. There'd be a primary, and these primaries, especially for these new districts, are getting pretty crowded. I think there's like 9 candidates, and Democrats, lining up to run for one of these seats. And so, I guess politically speaking, there's going to be primaries, and then we'll have the midterms, and we'll see how this all shakes out.
With a potentially radically different map, what kind of scramble will there be amongst candidates to run in these new seats? Do you have any sense of who some of the new favorites could be for these districts?
Yeah, I think once the conversation kicked, like earlier this year, I mean, once people knew things were kind of going this way and this conversation was happening, people were positioning themselves to run. And right now, people have launched campaigns for the current seats with kind of the understanding that maybe they jump into a different seat. People have launched campaigns for the new seats, just, thinking, hey, it's probably going to pass, so might as well just set things up now. So there are a broad swath of candidates, Democrats especially, who are lining up to run. It's hard to say who the favorites are. I think certainly, the current various incumbents are at a good advantage. I think, there's some notable names. Former Governor Terry McAuliffe's wife is running for a seat. Beth Macy, the author of Dopesick, is running for a seat. Former Congressman Tom Perriello is running for a seat. So some kind of bigger names, I guess, if you follow Virginia politics. But it's otherwise there are like some state delegates, state senators who are coming out, and we'll just have to see. Sometimes it's hard to tell with these primaries, like, why people run when there's like that many people in the field. Just kind of wonder sometimes, but
Well, especially when there are new districts, people see opportunity. And when you have states that have term limits, everybody is always looking for their next move.
Sure.
Yeah. And I know that U.S. Senator Mark Warner is up for re-election this year. It's not one of those top tier Senate races, but nonetheless, there have been some tight Senate races in Virginia. And as you pointed out, it's not exactly a solidly blue state. It's still purple. What are you seeing in the dynamics for that race? I know there are a number of Republicans who are considering running, and I saw that there are actually some Democrats that are considering challenging him as well.
Yeah, I think there was a candidate named Mark Moran who had running a primary, and then he got out of it, and now he's an independent. He's kind of a colorful character. He's a former reality show contestant, and he's. Yeah, I don't know. It's just, I was kind of odd. The way his campaign it was just kind of odd. He, in terms of Mark Warner, I think he's pretty popular here in Virginia. I don't think anybody, like you said, it's not really one a lot of people are wondering what the outcome will be. I think, interestingly enough, I think he came out in support of universal health care. I was trying to confirm that, but that would be a change for him. I think he did. And then when he launched his campaign, he made it kind of about he led with this messaging around AI and how AI is going to be like a big deal, which was kind of unusual, right? Because it's this was kind of before this was months ago, before AI kind of became much more of a hot topic than it is now. And so yeah, I think he's probably going to win. And I don't know. I honestly don't know who the Republicans are going to put up against him. Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely be following what happens next Tuesday with the referendum, and keeping an eye on the midterms in Virginia later on this year. Michael, tell us the best way that we can find your work.
You can subscribe to my newsletter. It's called Virginia Capital. It's focused on labor issues here in Virginia, labor policy, but I also talk about state politics. So that would be the best way to find me. I would Google my name and Virginia Capital, if you can't share a link, or if you could share a link, that'd be great. Yeah.
We will.
Okay.
When we send this out, we'll send the link, and then the Dogwood, I know, obviously has a site, and you're all over social media, Instagram, TikTok, so you can look for Michael's work there as well. Great. Well, thank you for joining us again, Michael.
Thank you, Susan. Have a good one.